What you're about to hear is not just a story of loss. It's a story of how an ordinary day turned into a nightmare that haunted an entire state. In 2004, 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger vanished from her college campus in broad daylight. No witnesses, no struggle, no goodbye. For 5 long years, her family searched without answers, while investigators unraveled a web of lies, crimes, and confessions that would finally reveal the truth. This is the story of a girl who disappeared into silence and the dark secret buried beneath Oregon's calm surface. May 24, 2004. It began like any other Monday morning in Corvallis, Oregon, a quiet college town nestled among forests and rain-soaked streets. 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger, home for the summer from Brigham Young University, left the apartment complex where her sister lived to do something simple: clean the light fixtures outside. She was barefoot, dressed in jeans and a grey sweatshirt, smiling as she worked. It was 10 a.m. when neighbors last saw her. By 11 she was gone. Her flip-flops were found neatly placed near the building, along with the cleaning supplies she'd been using. Her keys and cell phone were still inside the apartment. There was no sign of a struggle. It looked as if she had simply stepped away and vanished. At first, no one panicked. Corvallis was a safe town, the kind of place where students left bikes unlocked and doors open. Brooke's disappearance didn't fit the script of danger, but by noon, her sister Stephanie knew something was wrong. Brooke wasn't answering calls. She hadn't gone to work. She wasn't anywhere she was supposed to be. Stephanie contacted the police. Within hours, Corvallis detectives arrived at the scene, along with members of the Benton County Sheriff's Office. They found no footprints, no drag marks, and no witnesses who saw her leave. But there was one clue: a green minivan spotted by a resident parked suspiciously near the apartment around the same time Brooke vanished. By that evening, the search had begun. Hundreds of volunteers combed nearby woods, rivers, and fields. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Police brought in dogs that followed a scent trail, leading a few hundred yards before it abruptly stopped near the road, the same road where the green minivan had been seen. The news spread quickly across Oregon. Brooke wasn't just another missing college student. She was a beloved daughter, sister, and member of the local LDS community. Her photo, blue eyes, bright smile, blonde hair, appeared on every television screen in the state. Her parents, Greg and Cammie Wilberger, stood before cameras pleading for help. "Please, if you know anything, call us. We just want her back." As night fell over Corvallis, police faced the first terrifying reality. There was no sign of Brooke, no ransom call, no contact. Whoever took her had done it with precision and without leaving a trace. By the end of that first day, the search had become one of the largest in Oregon's history. But what no one knew then was that the man who took Brooke had already vanished too, and he wouldn't be found until years later in a different state, under a different name. Within 24 hours of Brooke Wilberger's disappearance, the quiet college town of Corvallis, Oregon, transformed into a scene of panic and confusion. Police, family, students, and volunteers spread out across every inch of the city, searching forests, creeks, and campus buildings. But the deeper they looked, the more impossible the situation seemed. A city on edge. By May 25th, over 700 volunteers had joined the search. Posters covered telephone poles, coffee shops, and university halls. Brooke's smile, bright, hopeful, became the face of fear in a town that had never known it. The Benton County Sheriff's Office coordinated massive search grids. Police divers scoured the Willamette River, while helicopters hovered over nearby forests. Local businesses donated food, flashlights, and equipment for search teams. But by the second day, something became clear. Brooke hadn't wandered off. She hadn't run away. She'd been taken. The investigation now focused on that mysterious green minivan seen near the apartment. Witnesses described it as a late 1990s Dodge Caravan with tinted windows, and inside possibly a man in his 30s or 40s, but no license plate number was ever recorded. Officers pulled over dozens of similar vehicles across Oregon. Each time, it led nowhere. The minivan and the man had vanished just as completely as Brooke. The family's anguish. Brooke's parents, Greg and Cammy Wilberger, faced the unthinkable. A missing daughter and no clues. Greg coordinated daily press briefings, while Cammy refused to leave home in case the phone rang. Every call brought a surge of hope, and then heartbreak. "You keep expecting her to walk through the door," Greg said. "And when she doesn't, you start living in seconds, not days." The LDS church community organized vigils, flooding Corvallis with candles and prayers. The Wilbergers' faith kept them standing, but the silence surrounding Brooke's disappearance grew heavier each passing hour. A pattern of fear. Within weeks, investigators began to suspect the case wasn't isolated. Other women across Oregon had reported being followed, harassed, or nearly abducted by men in similar vehicles. Some descriptions even matched the same dark-haired man rumored to have been seen near Brooke's complex. But each lead ended in frustration. No fingerprints, no DNA, no physical evidence. The only consistent clue was a vanishing trail, as though the suspect knew how to erase every trace. The FBI joined the case, classifying it as a possible abduction with interstate movement. Roadblocks and alerts were issued across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Still, nothing. Hope against silence. Weeks turned into months. The flyers faded, and search teams thinned. But the Wilberger family refused to give up. They established a website, a hotline, and worked directly with investigators. Each year, they held a candlelight vigil at the same time Brooke disappeared. Corvallis no longer felt safe. Women stopped walking alone. Parents double-locked their doors. For the first time, Oregon realized that something far darker was moving through its quiet streets. And it had taken Brooke with it. As weeks turned into months, investigators feared Brooke Wilberger's case would become another cold file. But 120 miles away, across the state, another story was unfolding. One that would eventually collide with hers. A crime too similar. In New Mexico, a young woman had been kidnapped, assaulted, and miraculously escaped. Her description of the man responsible was chilling. He was polite, calm, like he'd done it before. Duck. The suspect was Joel Patrick Courtney, a 38-year-old drifter with a record that stretched across multiple states. He'd been arrested in 2005 for the New Mexico attack after DNA linked him to the crime. When FBI agents began tracing Courtney's background, they found a disturbing pattern. His movements overlapped with unsolved disappearances and assaults in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. And in May 2004, the time of Brooke's disappearance, Courtney had been in Corvallis. The perfect disguise? Courtney wasn't the kind of man who drew suspicion. He was a married father, sometimes working in construction, sometimes traveling for odd jobs. His wife believed he was away on business trips. In reality, he was living a double life, moving between states, preying on young women, and leaving behind just enough evidence to confuse local jurisdictions. When investigators cross-referenced vehicle records, they discovered Courtney had been driving a green Dodge minivan in 2004, the same model seen near Brooke's apartment. A chill ran through the Corvallis Police Department. For the first time in years, they had a name, and it fit every missing piece. The connection emerges. In 2008, Oregon detectives traveled to New Mexico, where Courtney was serving time for the assault and kidnapping of the other woman. They brought photos, DNA samples, and witness statements from Corvallis. When shown Brooke's picture, Courtney barely reacted, but his eyes lingered on it a second too long. The FBI obtained a search warrant to test DNA recovered from Brooke's belongings. When compared to Courtney's sample, it was a match. 5 years after she vanished, the mystery of Brooke Wilberger's disappearance had finally met its monster. A calculated predator. According to investigators, Courtney had likely watched Brooke for days, studying her routine. On that quiet morning in May 2004, he pulled up in his van, approached her under the guise of conversation, and then struck, fast, controlled, and silent. He drove her out of Corvallis toward the coastal forest near Veneta, an isolated area of dirt roads and rivers. There, everything ended. When confronted with the evidence, Courtney initially denied it. But as the walls closed in, he made a deal. In exchange for taking the death penalty off the table, he would confess and reveal where Brooke was buried. The secret that had haunted Oregon for 5 years was finally about to surface. On September 21, 2009, in a small, silent courtroom in Benton County, Oregon, the air felt heavier than usual. After 5 long years of unanswered questions, Joel Patrick Courtney finally agreed to speak. He would plead guilty. But first, he had something to tell the court. The deal with the devil. The deal was simple, but agonizing. If he told investigators where Brooke Wilberger's body was buried, the death penalty would be taken off the table. For Brooke's family, it was a moral crossroads. Her mother, Cammy Wilberger, later said, "We wanted to bring her home. That was the only thing left we could do for her." It was the kind of decision no family should ever have to make, trading justice for closure. The courtroom held its breath as Courtney began to talk. His voice was flat, emotionless, almost bored, as he recounted the events of that spring morning in 2004. His words, her final moments. Courtney said he had driven through Corvallis when he spotted Brooke outside the apartment complex, cleaning light fixtures in her lifeguard shorts and t-shirt. He claimed he just pulled over to talk. Then, in seconds, everything turned violent. He forced her into his van, tied her hands, and drove her through winding forest roads until he reached a desolate area near Blodgett, Oregon. There, he raped her. And then, according to his own words, didn't want her to suffer. He struck her in the head with a blunt object. Afterwards, he buried her body under leaves, moss, and a pile of branches. He returned to his life as if nothing had happened. For 5 years, her family searched the forests, handed out flyers, begged for leads, all while her killer knew exactly where she was. The return to the woods. Guided by Courtney's directions, detectives drove through miles of narrow forested roads in western Oregon, deep into timberland owned by a private company. They followed a small dirt trail until they reached a shaded clearing. And there, after 5 years, they found her. What remained of Brooke Wilberger was carefully recovered and sent for forensic identification. When confirmation came back, the sheriff called her family personally. "We found Brooke." Those were the words they had waited years to hear, and dreaded in equal measure. Justice without peace. In December 2009, Joel Courtney was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was already serving another sentence for kidnapping and rape in New Mexico. Brooke's parents, Cammy and Greg, spoke publicly only once afterward. Cammy said softly to the press, "We can finally bring our daughter home, but there's no peace in it, only silence." For the people of Corvallis, Oregon, Brooke Wilberger's disappearance was more than a crime. It was a wound that refused to heal. Years after her abduction, her smiling face still hung in coffee shops, grocery stores, and on church bulletin boards. She had become a symbol of fear, of hope, and ultimately of heartbreak. The summer that changed everything. In 2004, Corvallis was known as a quiet college town. Families left their doors unlocked, children rode bikes until dusk, and violent crime was almost unheard of. But when Brooke vanished in broad daylight from a safe neighborhood on a bright morning, everything changed. Local women stopped jogging alone. Parents stopped letting their daughters walk to class after dark. The town's innocence evaporated almost overnight. Detective Greg Hawkins, one of the lead investigators, later said, "You could feel it in the air. Fear, guilt, disbelief. Everyone kept asking the same question: how could this happen here?" A family's strength. While the investigation stretched on for years, the Wilberger family refused to let Brooke's memory fade. They organized vigils, distributed flyers across state lines, and spoke at schools about safety and awareness. Cammy Wilberger became a quiet force, a mother who faced cameras and crowds with unshakable grace. She always used the present tense when talking about Brooke. She is kind, she is strong, and she is loved. Even when the media's attention moved on to news stories, the people of Corvallis never stopped wearing green ribbons, Brooke's favorite color. The ripple effect. Brooke's disappearance inspired new safety programs at Oregon State University, where she had worked nearby. Posters reminding students to report suspicious activity appeared on nearly every building. Community patrols and emergency call boxes were installed throughout campus and the surrounding neighborhoods. Teachers, parents, and local police began giving talks in schools, repeating the same message Brooke's story had taught them: it only takes a moment for everything to change. Her case also helped shape how Oregon law enforcement handles missing person investigations, speeding up alerts, improving interagency communication, and ensuring no disappearance ever sits idle. The light she left behind. Today, more than 20 years later, Brooke's story continues to echo across the Pacific Northwest. Each spring, local volunteers gather at Cummins Pond, where she once worked as a lifeguard, to clean the park and honor her memory. They plant flowers near the water's edge, the same kind Brooke loved to pick. The event isn't just a memorial, it's a reminder that one person's life, though brief, can touch thousands. "We can't bring her back," said one volunteer, "but we can make sure the world remembers who she was, not just how she was taken." When Joel Patrick Courtney confessed to the murder of Brooke Wilberger, Oregon finally had closure, but investigators quickly realized Brooke was not his only victim. Courtney's trail of violence stretched across multiple states, leaving behind broken lives, frightened communities, and unanswered questions. The pattern of a predator. Before Oregon knew his name, Courtney had already built a dark reputation across the American West. He was what investigators would later call a transient predator, constantly moving, never staying long enough to draw attention, but always hunting for opportunity. He worked odd jobs: janitor, mechanic, part-time driver. He slept in motels, in his van, or with casual acquaintances who knew nothing about his past. His victims, investigators found, were often young women with kind faces: students, waitresses, joggers, people who trusted easily. In 1991, Courtney was accused of attacking a woman in Alaska, but the case collapsed for lack of evidence. In 1998, he was arrested for indecent exposure in New Mexico. Each incident seemed isolated until the pattern became undeniable. The New Mexico survivor. In 2004, just weeks before Brooke disappeared, Courtney had approached another young woman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He offered her a ride home, smiling, calm, polite. When she refused, he pulled a knife and forced her into his van. She was assaulted, tied up and driven for miles, but she escaped when he stopped at a gas station. Her bravery would later save lives. When she reported the attack, detectives collected DNA from Courtney's vehicle. That sample would later match the DNA found on Brooke's belongings in Oregon. Without that survivor, Courtney might never have been connected to the case at all. A life of deception. Joel Courtney's neighbors described him as normal. He had a wife, 2 children, and a quiet home in Wenatchee, Washington. He went to church, volunteered occasionally, even hosted barbecues. But when investigators searched his home after his 2005 arrest, they found something that chilled them: maps, rope, duct tape, and notebooks full of women's names. Some were local, others were from places he'd lived or passed through. The FBI believes there could be other victims, women who disappeared in the early 2000s from Oregon, Idaho, and New Mexico, whose cases were never linked to Courtney. The agency quietly reopened several unsolved missing persons cases after his conviction. Justice, but not the end. Today, Joel Courtney sits in prison, serving life without parole. He never expressed remorse, and he's never cooperated in identifying any other victims. For Brooke's family, that silence is its own kind of cruelty. He took Brooke's life, her mother said, but he doesn't get to take her story. And that story of innocence, hope, and resilience continues to echo far beyond Oregon's borders. Between May 2004 and September 2009, the search for Brooke Wilberger became one of the largest and most relentless manhunts in Oregon's history. It was a mission defined not by evidence, but by faith, by a family who refused to let the world forget her name. The search begins. The morning after Brooke disappeared, hundreds of volunteers gathered in Corvallis. College students skipped classes, farmers brought ATVs, and rescue teams combed through fields, ponds, and dense forest. Helicopters circled overhead, search dogs worked through the rain, and local news stations aired her photo every hour. For the first week, the energy was electric. Everyone believed she would be found alive, but as days turned into weeks, that hope started to fracture. Still, her family kept searching. Brooke Wilberger, Brooke's mother, personally joined every major search effort. She refused to rest. "We didn't want to think of her as gone," she later said. "We wanted to think she was waiting for us somewhere." The volunteers, who never gave up. Each passing month brought new challenges. Snow, forest fires, false leads, and emotional exhaustion. But the volunteers never stopped. Some came from as far as California and Idaho. Others were strangers who had followed the story on TV. They carried flashlights, maps, and one shared conviction: Brooke deserved to come home. In 2005, the FBI joined the investigation, officially classifying the case as a likely abduction. Search efforts expanded into national parks, remote logging roads, and abandoned cabins. Hundreds of tips were investigated, dozens of suspects were questioned, but Brooke's trail was gone, erased by time, weather, and silence. The clues that haunted investigators. Over the years, fragments of evidence surfaced only to fade into dead ends. A piece of clothing found near a riverbank, a hairbrush believed to be hers, a possible sighting at a truck stop. Each discovery raised hope and crushed it just as quickly. Detective Greg Hawkins, who led much of the search, said, "Every time the phone rang, I hoped it was the call, but most days it was another heartbreak." Even when public attention shifted to newer cases, local law enforcement kept working quietly in the background, checking DNA, revisiting interviews, reanalyzing cell records. A family's endless vigil. Every Christmas, the Wilberger family left an empty chair at the table for Brooke. Every May, they held candlelight vigils at Cummins Pond, where she had once worked as a lifeguard. Her friends from high school spoke of her laughter, how she'd sneak cookies into class or play guitar on warm nights by the water. They didn't talk about the investigation anymore. They talked about Brooke. "You can't stop loving someone just because they're gone," one of her sisters said. "We were her search party, all of us." The disappearance of Brooke Wilberger did more than shake a quiet Oregon town. It transformed how law enforcement and the media across the United States approached missing person cases. Her story became a blueprint for how communities respond when the unthinkable happens. A lesson in coordination. When Brooke vanished in May 2004, the Corvallis Police Department was quickly overwhelmed. Hundreds of volunteers were calling in, leads were flooding in from all directions, and every hour brought another possible sighting. The case forced local agencies to rethink how they handled disappearances. At that time, Oregon didn't yet have a standardized, statewide missing persons protocol. Every agency had its own process. Brooke's case changed that. The Oregon State Police developed new procedures for interagency communication, evidence tracking, and public alerts. Within months, the state implemented a more unified Amber Alert-style system for adults who vanished under suspicious circumstances. Detective Greg Hawkins later said, "We learned more from Brooke's case than we ever wanted to. She changed how we search. Forever." The media's role. The early 2000s marked a new era in coverage of missing persons, the rise of 24-hour news and the Internet's growing influence. Brooke's case became one of the first to truly live in both worlds. Television networks like CNN, Dateline, and America's Most Wanted covered her story extensively, bringing national attention to Corvallis. But it was online forums, places like web sleuths and early message boards, that kept her name alive long after the cameras left. Ordinary people became investigators, analyzing maps, timelines, and reports. Some of their observations would later help confirm key details about the suspect's movements, but the coverage also had its darker side. Internet speculations spread fast, with some accusing Brooke's boyfriend, others her co-workers, and even family members. The Wilbergers learned firsthand how cruel public scrutiny could be. "We were living a nightmare," Brooke Wilberger said, "and strangers online thought it was entertainment." A catalyst for change. In the years following her death, Oregon lawmakers cited Brooke's case in debates about victim protection laws, DNA databases, and interstate cooperation for violent crime investigations. Her disappearance inspired new training programs for detectives across the Pacific Northwest, emphasizing early coordination between jurisdictions and immediate family engagement. Even college campuses took notice, installing more emergency call boxes, better lighting, and increased security near student housing. A legacy beyond the headlines. While Brooke's killer is now behind bars, her legacy lives on in every missing person case that moves faster, in every alert that goes out sooner, and in every investigator who refuses to give up. "She's still helping people," said one Oregon State trooper. "Even now, she's saving lives." Brooke's story is no longer just about tragedy, it's about transformation. Before she became a name on missing posters or a face on national television, Brooke Wilberger was just Brooke, a kind, radiant 19-year-old with a contagious smile and a heart that seemed far too big for one person. To those who knew her, she wasn't defined by how she died. She was remembered for how she lived. A bright spirit. Born in Fresno, California, Brooke was one of 7 children in the Wilberger family, a lively, close-knit household where laughter often drowned out everything else. When the family later moved to Veneta, Oregon, Brooke grew into the kind of person everyone gravitated toward. She loved sunsets, soccer, and small acts of kindness, like leaving encouraging notes in her siblings' lunchboxes or stopping to help strangers carry groceries. Her mother, Cammie, once said, "Brooke didn't just walk into a room, she lit it up." She volunteered with her church, tutored younger kids, and planned to attend Brigham Young University to study teaching. Her dream was to work with children and travel the world doing humanitarian work. But on May 24, 2004, her story was rewritten forever. The ripple of her life. After her disappearance, the Wilbergers created the Brooke Wilberger Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and promoting public safety awareness. They used Brooke's favorite color, green, as the foundation's symbol of life and hope. Every spring, local communities gather for the Brooks Run for Awareness, an event that raises funds for search and rescue programs. Families of other missing loved ones walk or run together, holding candles and wearing shirts that read, "For Brooke and for those still waiting to come home." Even in her absence, Brooke continues to bring people together, exactly as she did when she was alive. Her faith, her strength. Brooke's family often speaks about her deep faith in God, which guided her throughout her life. Friends recall how she used to quote her favorite verse before every new challenge, "Let your light so shine before men." That light never went out. It simply changed form, from the glow in her eyes to the glow of thousands of candles lit in her name across the Pacific Northwest. A life that still speaks to this day. Brooke's story is taught in law enforcement seminars, featured in documentaries, and remembered in church services and college vigils. Você disse, yes, oh ChatGPT disse, perfect. Here's the continuation and conclusion of Topic 9, Remembering Brooke Wilberger, the girl behind the headlines. 500 words total, continued from where we left off. A life that still speaks, continued. To this day, Brooke's story is taught in law enforcement seminars, featured in documentaries, and remembered in church services and college vigils. But her family insists she should not be remembered as a victim, rather as a young woman who embodied light, faith, and compassion. Her sister Stephanie once said, "When people talk about Brooke, I don't want them to talk about what happened to her. I want them to talk about how she made them feel, how kind she was, how much she cared." Her legacy is not one of tragedy, but of connection between family, faith, and community. People who never met Brooke still speak her name with reverence, inspired by the courage her family showed through years of pain and uncertainty. Her story has been shared in classrooms, prayer circles, and online communities across the world, not because of how she died, but because of the light she left behind. The green ribbon today, whenever someone in Oregon ties a green ribbon around a tree or a lamppost, it's more than a tribute. It's a promise. A promise that Brooke Wilberger will never be forgotten and that others like her will always be searched for, fought for, and remembered. Brooke's life reminded us that goodness still exists, even in the darkest places, said Pastor Michael Bell during the 20th anniversary vigil. Her story doesn't end in that forest. It lives on in every act of kindness her memory inspires. Brooke's light continues to travel far beyond Corvallis, a soft, steady reminder that even when evil wins a battle, love always writes the final chapter. Closing reflection. More than 20 years later, her mother still visits the spot near Blodgett, where Brooke was finally found. She brings wildflowers, Brooke's favorite, and whispers a prayer before leaving. I tell her we did it, Cammy says softly. We brought her home. For those who knew Brooke, and for those who only know her story, one truth remains. You can take away a life, but you can't take away its light, and Brooke's light still burns. In every heart she's touched, in every story told, and in every life saved because people cared enough to look. A legacy written in light. In the years since Brooke Wilberger's disappearance and the discovery of her remains, her story has evolved beyond tragedy. It has become a blueprint for awareness, a call for change, and a reminder of resilience. For investigators, it transformed how missing persons cases are handled in the United States, proving that persistence, communication, and family involvement can move mountains. For families of the missing, it became a symbol of hope that never fades, even when the nights grow long and the answers seem unreachable. But most of all, for her hometown of Veneta, Oregon, Brooke's name has become synonymous with kindness, courage, and community. In her name, every May, on the anniversary of her disappearance, hundreds gather at Cummins Pond, where Brooke once worked as a lifeguard. They plant trees, release green balloons, and recite the words she once lived by. Let your light so shine. The event isn't a funeral or a vigil, it's a celebration. Children play by the water, volunteers share stories, and the Wilberger family welcomes new faces every year. Brooke's laughter may no longer echo over the pond, but the spirit of who she was, joyful, humble, and selfless, is felt everywhere. Her name now appears on scholarships, awareness campaigns, and safety programs across Oregon. Every initiative that saves another life is a small victory, one she helped create. Her light endures. When asked what Brooke would think of her legacy, her mother once smiled and said she'd be embarrassed by all the attention. She'd tell us to focus on helping others, not on her. And that's exactly what they've done. The Brooke Wilberger Foundation has continued to fund missing person searches, trauma support groups, and community safety outreach. Each year, the Foundation's volunteers remind new generations of what Brooke stood for: love, faith, and the courage to care. In the end, Brooke's story is not about how a life ended. It's about how a life continues, in the goodness it inspires, in the safety it creates, and in the love it leaves behind. If this story moved you, remember that Brooke's light lives in the small things we do for others. Be vigilant, be kind, protect those around you. Share Brooke's story, not just as a tale of loss, but as a reminder of what love and persistence can accomplish. Visit Brooke's Light.org or support local organizations that help find missing persons. Let's make sure no one else fades into silence, because somewhere out there, another family is still searching, and your awareness could be the light that leads them home.